We're going to discuss compensation structures, right? So, uh, after a lot of time, not a lot of time, we've just had two classes only, right? So, today we'll have some numbers to talk of. It's not going to be a dry theoretical session today, right? We are going to discuss some numbers here. Okay, so we are going to talk of compensation structures. So, guys, do we know what management fee is? What is management fee?
It's a so management fee is the fee which accredited investors or institutional group pays to be inside that circle of hedge fund, irrespective of whether the fund makes profit or losses.
Just give me a second. I'll just be back. Okay. Okay. So management fee is basically the annual fee charged by the alternative investment fund, right, to cover the operating cost of the fund. And so this operating cost of the fund we were discussing includes the salaries of accountants, analysts, and other administration expenses of the fund. Right? And we had also said that the fund manager or the GP. Right. So in the last class, we were saying that there was a GP and there was an LP. So the GP was the fund manager of the alternative investment fund, and the LP was the investor. So GP, the fund manager, would decide where the funds would be invested, and the LP's role is just that he's going to contribute capital into the fund. Right. So LP does not decide where the money is invested. He does not take a part in the day-to-day activities of the fund. It's the GP that runs the show, right? LP's contribution is just contributing capital into the fund, right? So this GP gets the management fee irrespective of whether he generates profits or for the LP, right? So if the fund gives a loss in any given year, the GP will still charge management fees to the LP, right? So this management fee is paid irrespective of the performance of the fund, right? So in case of a hedge fund, the management fee is typically 1 to 2% of the AUM, AUM of the fund, right? AUM stands for assets under management. And for a private equity fund, um, management fee is some percentage of the committed capital. It's around 1 to 2% of committed capital. Now, what is committed capital? Now, I'm going to talk of this in detail later on, but I'm going to give you an intuition here. See, committed capital is the capital that the LP have promised or committed to invest in the private equity fund, but not yet invested. Please write this down. If please make some notes while I speak, although you will get all these recordings. See, committed capital is the capital that the LP has promised that he's going to invest in the alternate investment fund or in the private equity fund, but he's not yet invested that, right? So this committed capital is not invested immediately. It's invested over a period of time as the GP identifies suitable investment. Right, and there is a reason behind calculating the management fee as a percentage of committed capital and not as a percentage of AUM. I will tell this reason when I discuss private equity in detail. But for the time being, one thing that we need to keep in mind is that for private equity funds, the management fee is a certain percentage of the committed capital, and the committed capital is the capital that the LP has promised that he is going to invest in the PE fund. Right? He has promised, he's committed to invest that much money in the PE fund, but he's not yet invested that. Okay. So this was my discussion with respect to incentive management fee. What is incentive fee?
Rahul, one question.
Yep.
So you mentioned that sometimes GP will also put his own money towards the total fund, right? Towards the total
If the
alternative investment
losses
fund.
exceed the capital of the fund, right? What I said was if the losses of the fund exceed the capital, see in some derivative instruments your losses can be more than the amount you've invested, right?
Correct. Irrespective of the losses, I mean, like let's say there is, uh, you're investing $100 million. GP has an option to put 10 million of his own money
Hmm.
into the pool and invest the entire 110 million together, right?
Yes,
In that case, will GP also pay? If it's a hedge fund, will GP also pay 1 to 2% of his $10 million towards the operating cost?
yes,
Okay, and the LPA regulations or whatever between the fund and GP will be like when we are dealing with the 10 million, GP will be treated as an LP.
yes, yes,
The agreement applies. Okay.
yes, yes. So
Yeah.
the idea
Thanks.
is that the management fee would be paid on the total AUM irrespective of irrespective of who contributed that capital, right? So irrespective of whether that capital was contributed by the GP or the LP, management fee would be calculated on the total asset under management of the fund, right? So it's a very good question.
Is management fee a one-time fee or a
It's an
recurring fee?
annual fee. It's an annual fee, right? It's an annual
So
fee.
is it taken from the fund every year
Yes, it's deducted from the
or
closing
a
balance
person
of the
pays it?
fund. It's deducted from the dollar amount is deducted from the closing AUM of the fund. So the dollar amount of the fee is going to get deducted from
Okay.
the closing asset under management. And I'll just do a question on that. I have to discuss high watermark
Yeah.
provision. I'll do a question on that. Things will get clear. Right?
Okay. Thanks.
I'll do a, I have to discuss something called a high watermark provision where I'll be discussing how to calculate the incentive fee and the management fee. Right? Things would get absolutely clear there. Okay. So then we have this incentive fee. This incentive fee is also known as the performance fee, and sometimes it's also known as carried interest. So we got to be good with these three names, and this incentive fee is the reward given to the GP when he generates positive returns, right? So incentive fee is given out only if the GP generates profits, unlike management fee, which is paid irrespective of that. And incentive fee is you know incentive fee given to the GP is around 20% of the total profits of the fund. So what that basically means is that the profits generated by the fund are usually split in 80-20 ratio. 80% of the profits of the fund goes to the LP and 20% of the profits of the fund goes to the GP, right? So this is the usually um, agreed upon profit sharing ratio, but the profit sharing ratio might differ uh, depending upon what is agreed upon between the LP and the GP, right? Depending upon what's written in the limited partnership agreement. But usually across the alternative investment fund industry, the usually profit split is 80-20, right? So this incentive fee is paid only when the GP generates profits for the fund, right? And management fee is paid irrespective of whether he generates profits or not. Now we have to discuss something called a hurdle rate. Let me. We have to discuss something called a hurdle rate. So today, guys, please pay a lot of attention because all this is tested in the exam, right? All this is going to be tested in the exam. Hurdle rate. Now, what is this hurdle rate? Now, hurdle rate is the minimum return, the minimum profit that the GP must generate before he is eligible to receive incentive fee, right? It's the minimum return that he must generate uh, for him to be eligible to receive incentive fee, right? Say the hurdle rate is 10% and the GP generates a return of 8%, right? So the return on the fund for any given year is 8% and the hurdle rate is 10%. So will the GP get any incentive fee? Guys, will the GP get any incentive fee? The hurdle rate is 10%. The minimum return that he must generate is 10% for him to get any, for him to be eligible to receive incentive fee. But the return he generated during the year was only 8. So is he eligible to receive any incentive fee?
No.
No,
No.
he is
No.
not
No.
eligible to receive any incentive fee. He'll only get
No.
management fee, right? He'll only get management fees, right? So this 8% less any management fees goes to the LP. This 8% less any management fee would go to the LP, right? GP gets only the management fee. He does not get any incentive fee, right? Okay. So say instead of 8%, the GP generates a return of um, GP generates or the fund manager generates. Okay, whenever I say GP, think I'm saying fund manager, right? So you'll be able to correlate better. Say the GP generates a return of 30%. Now is he eligible to receive incentive fee? Yes, he is, right?
Yeah.
Because the return on the fund exceeds the hurdle rate of 10%. But the question is he eligible to receive incentive fee on the total return of 30% or the excess of total return over the hurdle rate, right? So let's draw this diagram. Okay, so say this is the return of the fund 30%. This is the hurdle rate of 10%. Right, now the return of the fund exceeds the hurdle rate, so there's no doubt that the GP is going to get incentive fee, right? But will we calculate incentive fee on the total return, that is 30%, or will we calculate incentive fee on the excess of total return on the excess of total return over the hurdle rate, that is 30 minus 10, 20%. Now this is the question, will we get
Total 30%.
okay, so this depends whether this hurdle rate is a soft or a hard. Now hurdle rates can be soft hurdle rates or hard hurdle rates, right? So if this 10% hurdle rate is a soft hurdle rate, then the GP gets incentive fee on the total return, right? So total return is 30%. The 30% is going to be split in 80-20 ratio. GP gets 20% of 30%, which is 6. This goes to the GP and the LP is going to get the remaining, that is 30 minus 6, 24. Right? So if this 10% is a soft hurdle rate, then the GP's incentive fee is calculated on the total return. However, if this 10% is a hard hurdle rate, then the GP's incentive fee is calculated on the excess of total return over the hurdle rate, right? So excess return over the hurdle rate is 20%, right? So in this case, so hard hurdle. So in this case, what's going to happen is that the GP's incentive fee is going to be calculated on the excess return, which is 20%. So he's going to get 20% of 20%, right? So 20% here is the excess return, and 20% is basically the profit sharing ratio. So 20 into 20 is 4%, and the remaining 26% goes to the LP. Okay, so guys, which uh, Tell me which hurdle rate is beneficial for the GP? Is a soft hurdle beneficial for a GP or a hard hurdle beneficial for the GP?
Soft.
So
Soft is right. Soft is beneficial for the GP. He gets more, right? He gets more incentive fee. And hard hurdle is not so beneficial, right? In a hard hurdle, the GP gets a lower share of profits, right? The hard hurdle rate, we can say, benefits the LP at the expense of the GP, right? So, what we need to remember is that a soft hurdle is more favorable for a GP, for the fund manager, for the GP. This is something that we need to kind of keep in mind. And the hard hurdle benefits the LP at the expense of the GP, right? So the LP gets more incentive fee when the hurdle rate is a hard hurdle rate. Any doubts here, please? Anyone's having any kinds of doubts up till now? So if it's a soft hurdle rate, then the GP's incentive fee is calculated on the total return if the total return exceeds the hurdle rate. And if it's a hard hurdle rate, then the GP's incentive fee is calculated on the excess return, right? It's calculated on the excess return. It's calculated on the excess of total return over the hurdle rate. Okay, so this is something that we need to keep in mind. Now we need to talk of something called a something called as high watermark provision. Now this is like a bit tricky. This is very tricky. Not explained properly in the book. So let's understand this with an example, right? So the example is going to make much more sense than all the theory that I'm going to tell you. Okay. So and here Anudeep, we are going to calculate all those fees as well. So your doubts are going to get clear now. Okay. So say a fund, we have the AUM of the fund on the y-axis and we have time on the x-axis, right? So say this fund started at time 0 with an AUM of 100 million, and at the end of the first year the AUM of the fund increased to 130 million, right? So uh, let's say the management fee is 2% of the closing AUM of the fund, and let's say that the incentive fee is 20% of the profits, right? So now, guys, you know, the fund started with 100 million at the end of the first year. Its AUM was 130, so profits for the year were 30 million. So we need to calculate the management fee and the so the for the time being I'm ignoring the hurdle rates here because that's going to make things very tricky. So you know, let's calculate the management fee. Management fee is going to be 2% of the closing AUM. So closing AUM of the fund is how much? 130, right? So 2% of 130 is how much? 2.6. And let's say that this incentive fee is calculated independent of the management fee. Now, what does this mean? Incentive fee is calculated independent of the management fee. Guys, what does this mean? So, what that means is that while calculating incentive fee, we won't deduct management fees from the profits, right? So, we won't deduct the management fees from the profits while calculating the incentive fee. So, my incentive fee is going to be profits for the year is the closing AUM minus the opening AUM into 20%. GP gets 20% of the profit. So that's how much? 13 to 20 is 6. So the total fees paid to the GP is going to be 8.6 million, right? And the this 130 million was the AUM of the fund before fees, right? This 130 was before fees, and we are going to pay 8.6 million as fees to the GP. So after fees, closing AUM of the fund after fees is going to be closing AUM at end of year 1 after fees. That's going to be 130 minus 8.6, which is 121.4, right? So my closing AUM after fees at the end of year 1 is 121.4, right? Now this is after fees, right? Now what will happen is that this 121.4 is the highest value of the fund on the performance fee calculation date, on the incentive fee calculation date, and we are going to set this 121.4 as a high water mark, right? Now what this means is that in future, incentive fee or performance fee will be paid to the GP only if the AUM exceeds 121.4, right? So in subsequent years, in future years, incentive fee is going to be paid only and only when the AUM of the fund exceeds 121.4. Else, no incentive fee will be paid, right? So this 121.4, that is the highest value of the fund on the performance fee date, is set as the high water mark. Now say this was my year 1, right? Incentive fee is going to be paid only when the AUM crosses 121.4 in subsequent years. Now say what happens in year 2, AUM of the fund before fees declines to, say, it declines to 110, right? So say this is 110 before fees, right? So I'm going to write this 110 before fees. So the AUM of the fund has declined. Will the GP get incentive fee? Is he eligible to get incentive fee in year 2? Guys, tell me, is he eligible?
No.
He is not eligible to receive any incentive fee, performance fee. Is he eligible to receive management fee?
Yes.
Yes, he is eligible to receive management fee. Management fee is paid irrespective of whether the GP makes money or not. Right. So let's calculate the management fee for year 2. So management fee for year 2 is basically the closing AUM of the fund, which is 110. Now management fee can be calculated on the opening or the closing AUM. That depends upon what is written in the limited partnership agreement, right? So for the sake of convenience right now, I am calculating the management fee on the closing AUM, but it can be calculated on the opening or the closing depending upon what's written in the LPA. Whatever question you might give it, you might get in the exam, it will be clearly written. It will be clearly written on the question that whether you need to calculate the management fee on closing or opening. So the management fee for year 2 is going to be 110 into 2%, which is 2.2, right? So my closing AUM after fees, after deducting fees for year 2 is going to be 110 minus 2.2, and that's going to work out to 107.8. So right, what we are going to do is, uh, I'm going to say that the closing AUM of the fund after fees is 107.8 in year 2. Okay. Now third year, AUM of the fund rises to, say, 128, right? AUM of the fund increases to 128, right? Now since AUM of the fund since the AUM of the fund is, since the AUM at the end of year 3 exceeds the high water mark set in year 1, GP is eligible to receive incentive fees, right? Since the AUM in year 3, AUM at the end of year 3 exceeds the high water mark set in year 1. This 121 exceeds 128 1.4. This 128 exceeds this 121.4. Since the AUM of the fund at the end of year 3 exceeds the high water mark set in year 1, now the GP is eligible to receive incentive fee, right? Okay. So now this incentive fee, please remember this, will be paid on the portion of the AUM that exceeds the high water mark, right? So the incentive fee would be paid on this portion of the AUM that exceeds the high water mark, and that portion is this, right? See, the total increase in AUM for year 3 is this much, right?
So the red line is 121.4, not 130, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
This red line, let's remove this. Let's say this is 121.4, right? So the total return, the total increase in AUM for year 3 is this much, right? This is the total increase, but incentive fee would be paid only on this portion, right? This highlighted in blue, right? So incentive fee is paid on the portion of the AUM that exceeds the high water mark, right? So let's calculate the management fee and the incentive fee for year 3, right? So the management fee is going to be 2% of your closing AUM, that is 2% of 128, which is 2.56, and the incentive fee is going to be calculated on the portion of the AUM that exceeds the high water mark. So that's going to be closing AUM of year 3, that is 128, minus your high water mark set in year 1 into 20%. Just calculate this for me. Calculate this incentive fee for me. How much does it work out to?
1.32.
1.32 million.
1.32. So the total fees is 2.56 plus 1.32. So that's around, total fees is 3.88, right? So the closing AUM after fees for year 3 is 128 minus 3.88, which is कितना आएगा? Will this come to 124.12? Just check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
124.1.
So the closing AUM for year 3 after fees is going to be 124.12, right? Okay. Now this uh, you know this new high, this 124.12 is a new high, and this new high will be set as a new high watermark, right? So let's name this as high watermark 2. This 124.12 is going to be set as a new high watermark. So in future years, in subsequent years, that is in year 4, 5 and beyond, incentive fee will be paid to the GP only if the AUM crosses 124.12, right? Only if the AUM crosses 124.1. Now, this high water mark, what purpose is it solving? See, this high water mark ensures that incentive fee is paid only on new profits of year 3, right? So um, this total is the entire profit of year 3, right? This entire green shaded area is the total profit for year 3, right? But you know, uh, this much profit, this much profit, that is, this much profit is, the this much profit of year 3 offset the loss of year 2, right? This much profit of year 3 offset the loss of year 2. So no incentive fee would be paid on profits of year 3 that offset the losses of year 2, right? Incentive fee would be paid only on new profits, and new profits for year 3 is basically this. This, this is the new profits for year 3. This yellow area, this yellow area that you see here is basically the profits for year 3 that offset the losses of year 2. So high watermark ensures that incentive fee is paid only on new profits and not on those profits that offset the losses of the prior years, right? So this is the idea of your high watermark provision, and I think that solves a lot of your fee calculation problems also. So guys, do you have any doubts? Please ask me now. So in year 3, now what's going to happen at the end of year 3? This 124.12 is going to become the new high watermark. And in future years, that is in year 4, 5, 6 and beyond, incentive fee would be paid only if AUM crosses this 124.12. If it does not, no incentive fee would be paid to the GP. Are we good, guys? Any doubts, please? Uh, Anudeep or
One quick question now.
uh,
So previously we were discussing about the hurdle rate, right? The
don't
software.
so see the thing is that don't involve that hurdle rate right now, because it's going to
Okay.
get really complicated, right?
Okay.
Uh, we'll do questions where we have both the high watermark and the hurdle rate. Don't worry about it. But
Makes sense. Okay.
just to get the message across, right? I mean, I told you this just to get the message across.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no.
We're
My
going to
question was,
combine this. Yes, tell me.
yeah, my question was just to ask whether there will be a situation where they both combine or not.
Yes,
That's
there's going to be the situation, and that's going to be the hardest situation in this
okay.
particular, calculation. They're going to get some, right? We're going to get.
Makes
Okay. Now,
okay.
let's discuss something called as waterfall structures, right? We are going to discuss something called as waterfall structures, right? So, there are two kinds of waterfall structures, right? And let's write those, what the waterfall structures are. Now waterfall structures also tell us how profits are going to be distributed between the, at what time profits are going to be get distributed between the LP and the GP, right? So waterfall structure. Okay, so now this waterfall structure can be European or it could be American, right? So we have two kinds of waterfall structures, European waterfall and American waterfall, right? Now this European waterfall structure is known as whole of fund waterfall structure, and this American waterfall structure is uh, known as deal by deal waterfall structure. Now let's discuss what these two are. Now in this European waterfall structure, GP gets his share of profits, that is his incentive fee, only when the LP receives 100% of what he had invested and the hurdle rate, right? So here the GP gets his share of profit only after he returns 100% of what the LP had invested plus the hurdle rate. Now the hurdle rate is what we already know what the hurdle rate is. It's the minimum return that the GP must generate before he is eligible to get incentive fee. So in this European waterfall structure, I'm going to repeat this again. GP gets incentive fee only after he's returned 100% of what the LPs had invested plus the hurdle rate, right? So if he's not returned that if he's not returned what the LPs had invested plus the hurdle rate, GP gets no incentive fee, right? If he's not returned the 100% of the initial investment of the LPs plus the hurdle rate, if he's not returned that to the LP, then the GP is going to get no incentive fee, right? So
So essentially, this is just hurdle rate, right, Rahul? No change. 100% would be his principal, and hurdle rate is
it
the
would
return
be
expected
return,
of him.
yes,
Okay, okay.
and exactly that. Uh, um, that investment is going to be the principal invested by the LP in the fund, exactly, and the hurdle rate is the minimum return that the GP must generate. So
Yeah.
the problem with this European structure is that the GP has to wait for a long time before he gets his share of profits, right? So he has to return all that money to the LP, the principal as well as the hurdle rate. So the GP will have to wait for a long time before he gets his share of profit. So we're going to write this here. The drawback of this European structure for the GP is that the GP has to wait for a long time before he gets his share of profits. Right. So this is your European structure. Now what? Now we are going to discuss the American waterfall structure. It's known as the deal by deal waterfall structure. So here the GP gets his share of profits, that is incentive fee, on a deal by deal basis. So as soon as a deal is exited, GP gets his incentive fee. Unlike the European waterfall structure, where the GP has to wait till he returns the initial investment plus the hurdle rate to the LP, right? So here the GP gets his share of profit sooner, right? He's going to get his share of profit sooner. GP gets the incentive fee on a deal by deal basis. Right. So as soon as a deal is exited, if that deal is exited at a profit, the GP is going to get his share of profit. That is he's going to get his incentive. Right. I'm going to do an example on this, but before discussing that example, I'm going to discuss something called as a clawback provision. Right. We are going to discuss this with an example, but before that, we need to know something called as a clawback provision. Okay. Now, what is this clawback provision? Now, this clawback provision allows the LP is the investor. So, it allows the LP to reclaim a part of the GP's incentive fee, right? So, allows the LP is the investor, to reclaim a part of the GP's incentive fee. Now, let's understand how these things work. Okay. Now, let's understand this clawback provision. Say, for example, and this clawback provision is going to be there only in an American waterfall. It's not going to be there in a European waterfall. It's always there in an American waterfall. Now, so you kind of have to know this because this can be tested in the exam. So, say for example, if the GP makes profitable exits in the early years and gives a loss in subsequent years, it may create a situation where GP may get more than 20% of the profits at the aggregate level. Now, to ensure that the profit sharing ratio is in line with the LPA, the GP has to repay the excess profits that he had collected initially to the LP under this clawback provision. Right. So I'm going to repeat this, and then I'm going to give you an example. Say, if the GP makes profitable exits in the early years and gives a loss in subsequent years, it may create a situation where the GP may get more than 20% of the profits at the aggregate level. Now, to ensure that the profit sharing ratio is in line with the LPA, the GP has to repay the excess profits that he had collected initially to the LP under this clawback provision, right? Okay. So let's do the example of this. Okay. Let's say there's this P fund, and this P fund had made two investments at the same time. Say it had bought two private companies at the same time. So he say the PE fund bought company A at 100 million. PE fund bought company A at 100 million and company B at say 150 million, right? And both these investments were made at the same time by the PE fund. Now, what happens is that a few years down the line, um, the PE fund sells its stake in company A. It sells its stake in company A, right? So out of these two investments, C and B, the PE fund sells out of this investment in company A first. So say it sells company A at 400 million. So what is the profit for the fund on its investment in company A? 400 minus 100, that is 300. Now, incentive fee for the GP is going to be 300 into 20, that is 60. Now, this is say American waterfall, right? So, the GP is going to collect this 60 million immediately as soon as the fund exits company A, right? The GP gets this 60 million immediately as soon as the fund exits company A, right? So the GP has 60 million is in his pockets right now. Now what happens is that a few years later, right? A few years later, right? A few years in the future, that is after selling company A, a few years after selling company A, the PE fund sells company B, right? And it sells company B at 80 million. That's a loss of 70. So now the GP is not going to get any incentive fee, right? Now the aggregate profit for this fund is 230, right? Now what should be the GP share in the aggregate profit? What should be the GP's share? What should be the incentive fee on the aggregate profit that is payable to the GP? He is eligible to receive 230 into 20, that is 46, right? He is eligible to receive 46 on the aggregate level, but he's already received 60 when the first deal was exited, right? He's eligible to receive 46 based on the aggregate profits of the fund, but he's already collected 60 as soon as the first deal was exited, right? So what is the excess profit that the GP has received? Guys, please tell me, what is the excess profit that the GP has received?
40.
14. So under the clawback provision, the GP has to GP has to repay this 14 um, to the LP, right? The GP has to repay this excess 14 million, or this excess 14 to the LP under the clawback provision, right? So this is your clawback provision, right? The GP has to repay the 14. No, so let's say this 14 is a million to the LP, right? And this is happening why? This is happening because the GP had made, the fund had made profitable exits in early years, and given a loss in subsequent years. And because this structure is American, you know, the GP had collected incentive fee in the earlier years, which was more than the aggregate profits of the fund, right? So it had collected excess profits in early years, and he has to repay that in the later years. Guys, are we good with this? Any doubts here? Any doubts? Anyone? Um, Guys, Neil, Sahil,
So,
Sai, yep.
do hurdle rates don't apply for American structure,
Yes, they can apply, right? They can apply,
but
but I'm giving you a
only
simpler
applies for the
example.
deal?
Yes, yep, they do apply. They do apply. Hurdle rates are going to apply everywhere, right? I'm just giving you an example so that you can, we can have a hard hurdle or a soft hurdle here as well, right? They do apply.
And how do they apply? Is it per deal or on an aggregate?
See, they apply on an aggregate level, but they apply on an aggregate level, right? They apply on an aggregate level. So we are going to do questions on that as well, but uh, this is just an example.
Okay.
So they do
Okay.
apply. The actual, if you go through the LPA, the LPA is like really, 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 really complicated. Okay. Um, but I'm going to, I'm giving you simpler examples, because if I add hurdle rates, then these examples are going to get like really complicated. But there are hurdle rates for P funds. There are going to be hurdle rates for hedge funds, right? Okay. Now, the last thing. I missed something. I missed discussing something, and that's a hurdle rate with a catch-up clause, right? A hurdle rate with a catch-up clause. That's going to be the last discussion for the day. Hurdle rate with a catch-up clause. Okay. So right now we discussed a soft hurdle and a hard hurdle. Now, what is the soft hurdle? The soft hurdle is basically, if the total return on the fund exceeds the hurdle rate, then the GP gets incentive fee on the total return. What was the hard hurdle? If the return on the fund exceeds the hurdle rate, then the GP gets incentive fee on the excess return. Now you have a hurdle rate with a catch up clause. You have a hurdle rate with a catch up clause. Now what is this? Now this particular hurdle rate is neither hard nor soft. It's just a hurdle rate with a catch-up clause. So don't confuse this hurdle rate to be soft or hard. It's another category altogether. It's a hurdle rate with a catch-up clause, right? So don't confuse this hurdle rate with a catch-up clause to be a soft hurdle or a hard hurdle, right? So how does this hurdle rate with a catch-up clause work? let's say that let's say the total return of a fund is 14%, right? So say this rectangle that you see here is 14%, right? And the hurdle rate is 8%, right? This is my hurdle rate, and the profit sharing ratio between the LP and the GP is 80-20, right? Okay, so in a hurdle rate with a catch up clause, what's going to happen is that the first 8%, that is the hurdle rate, the first 8%, that is the hurdle rate, is going to go to the LP. The next 2% is going to go to the GP. Now, by giving this next 2% to the GP, we ensure that the first 10% is shared as per the agreed 80-20 profit sharing ratio. So, by giving this 2% to the GP, we allow the GP to catch up with the LP, right? So, this is a hurdle rate with a catch up clause, right? So, out of the 14%, 8 plus 2, 10 has already gone, remaining 4. This remaining 4% is shared between the LP and the GP at the agreed 80-20 profit sharing ratio, right? So 80% of 4 is 3.2. So 3.2 goes to the LP, and the remaining 20% of 4, that is 0.8, goes to the GP, right? So the total return, the returns that go to the LP are 8 plus 3.2, that is 11.2, and returns that go to the GP are 2.8. So I'm going to explain this again. This is a hurdle rate with a catch up clause. We had our hurdle rate of 8%, and there is an 80-20 profit sharing ratio between the LP and the GP, and the return in a particular year of this fund is 14%, right? Now this hurdle rate with a catch up clause says that the first 8%, that is the hurdle rate, goes to the LP. This 8% is the hurdle rate. Then the next 2% goes to the GP, and by giving the next 2% to the GP, we ensure that the first 10% is shared as per the agreed 80-20 profit sharing ratio. By giving this 2% to the GP, we allow the GP to catch up with the LP. Okay. Now, after 8 plus 2, 10 has been distributed. What remains is 4%, right? 10% out of this 14 has been distributed. So what remains to be distributed is 4. That 4% is going to be split in the agreed 80-20 profit sharing ratio, right? So 3.2 goes to the LP and 0.8 goes to the GP. This is your catch up clause. Now we are going to compare this to a soft hurdle. Let's say this 8% was not a hurdle rate with a catch up clause, it was a soft hurdle, right? So now we are going to calculate the, what goes to the GP and what goes to the LP. Okay. So say this 14% is the return on the fund, and this 8% is a soft hurdle rate. Okay. So the soft hurdle rate is 8%, and the fund has generated a return of 14%. So is the GP eligible to receive incentive fee? Guys, is he eligible to receive incentive fee?
Yes.
Yes, he is
Yes.
eligible because the return on the fund exceeds the hurdle. Right now, since the return on the fund exceeds the hurdle, this the incentive fee for to the GP will be calculated on the total return, right? So GP is going to get 20% of the total return, which is 14, that works to 2.8, and the LP is going to get 80% of that, which is how much? 11.2. Right. So here what's going to happen is 11.2 goes to the LP, and the 2.8 goes to the GP. Right. And last look, think if this hurdle rate was a hard hurdle rate. Okay. So let's do this as well. Let's say that this 8% is a hard hurdle rate, right? And the return on this fund is again 14%. So this 8% is a hard hurdle. Return on the fund is 14. Is the GP eligible to receive incentive fee? Is he eligible to receive incentive?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, he is eligible to receive incentive fee. So what would be the incentive fee? Incentive fee would be calculated on the total return, or will it be calculated on the excess return?
Excess.
Yes, right. So GP return is going to be 20% of the excess return. Excess return is 6, 14 minus the hard hurdle. So that works out to how much? 6, 1.2%. And LP is going to get the remaining, which is how much? 14 minus 1.2 is
12.8.
12.8. Right? So let's make that thing. So LP gets 12.8, GP gets 1.2. Right? So we've compared the three hurdle rates. Now, if you would notice that in a soft, in this soft hurdle, and in this hurdle rate with the catch-up clause, the distributions to the LP and the GP are the same. Yes, can you see
One
that?
question there.
Yes, sir.
So you said in the hurdle rate with a clause, the hurdle rate goes to the LP directly.
Yes.
Right? Okay, and what after giving the hurdle rate, you automatically consider that to be the 80%,
Yes. Yes.
and then you decided if 80% is that, what the 20% would be.
What with the next? Yes. What?
It's not 20% of the 8%.
No. No. No.
Okay. Got it.
So if the profit sharing ratio were to be 90-10, right?
Yeah.
And so if it were to be 90 and 10, and
So 90% would be 8. Then you calculate what
yes,
10%.
90% would be 8, and then you would calculate. So that would work to around 8 by 0.9. So that's 8.89, right? So 100% would be
Yeah.
8.89. So 0.89 would go to the LP, and 8 would
Correct.
go
Yeah.
to the 0.89 would go to the GP, and the 8 would be given to the LP, right? So
Got it. Yeah.
that's absolutely right. Okay, so see, the distributions to the LP and the GP are equal under this soft hurdle with in this soft hurdle and in the hard hurdle with the catch-up clause, right? This is my hurdle with the catch-up clause, and this is my soft hurdle, right? This is my hurdle with the catch-up clause. This is my soft hurdle. So the distributions to the LP and the GP are the same here. So you might be tempted to think that hurdle with catch-up and soft hurdle are the same. You might be tempted to think like that. Now, your hurdle with catch-up and soft hurdle are similar to some extent, but they are not exactly the same. They are not exactly the same. They are similar to some extent, but not exactly the same. So let's compare the two. Like, so they are almost equal. This hurdle with the catch-up clause is almost equal to your soft hurdle, but not exactly equal. Where do they differ? I'm going to tell you that. Okay, let's compare this hurdle with catch up with soft hurdle. Well, let's compare the three only: soft, hard, everything. Now let's say that the hurdle rate is 8%, right? The hurdle with catch up is 8%, and the profit sharing ratio is 80/20, right? Now let's say that the return in any particular year is 9%, right? Let's make all the three cases. The return is 9%. So let's talk of this soft hurdle, right? If the soft hurdle rate is 8% and the return on the fund is 9% in any particular year, right? So the GP is eligible to receive the incentive fee because naturally the return exceeds the hurdle rate, and the incentive fee would be calculated on the total return, right? So the total return is 9%. So GP's share is going to be 20% of 9, that is 1.8. Right, so 1.8% of this 9 goes to the GP, and the remaining 7.2 goes to the LP. Now, now let's speak of this hard hurdle, right? Uh, See, so the return on the fund is more than the hard hurdle, right? It's more than the hard hurdle. So the GP is eligible to receive incentive fee, but he is eligible to receive the incentive fee on the excess return, and that excess return is 9 minus 8, 1%. So the GP's share in the profits or his incentive fee is going to be 20% of uh, 20% of 1. That is how much? 0.2, right? So he gets 0.2, and the remaining 8.8 goes to the LP. Now let's come to this hurdle with catch up, right? So in this hurdle with catch up, the first 8%, that is the hurdle rate, is going to go to the LP. So this 8%, that is the hurdle rate, goes to the LP, right? Now the next 2% should have gone to the GP, right? But the return on the fund is only 9, right? So the next entire 1% goes to the GP, right? The next 2% should have gone, but we can't give him the next 2% because the return on the fund is only 9, right? So the next 1% too goes to the GP, right? So you know what the idea is, that after the LP gets the hurdle rate, the GP gets all the remaining return until the 80/20 ratio is reached. But here that's not possible because the return is only 1%. Return, the excess return, because the fund has generated only 9%, right? So the first 8% goes to the LP, and the next 1% goes to the GP, right? So this is your hurdle with catch up. So here the GP gets 1%. Now guys, compare. Now is the soft hurdle and the hard hurdle the same? Guys, is it the same? Please tell me.
No,
Is the soft hurdle and the hurdle with the catch up the same? Is the soft hurdle and the hurdle with the catch up the same? Are they the same?
no,
They are not.
no.
They are not the same, right? So, you know, um, if the return on the fund was 10% or more, then this hurdle with catch up and the soft would have been, would have resulted in these similar distributions to the GP and the LP, right? But when the return on the fund is between 8 and 10, this hurdle with catch up and soft are going to give us different results. Had it been more than 10 or 10, then hurdle with catch up and soft would have given us the exact same result, but not when the return on the fund is between 8 and 10, right? um, in that region they are going to give us different results. Now, given this idea, guys, given this idea, tell me which compensation structure is most favorable for the GP. Which compensation structure is most favorable?
Soft hurdle. Soft.
Soft. Then let's
Catch
make
up.
that hierarchy. Then is catch up, and the last is hard.
Hard.
So this is a 5-star point. You might get this question in the exam, but if you read the book, whenever you get time to read the book, you'll never find such things written there, because the exam is going to be more of intuition based. So things written in the book may not, you have to imply a lot of things, right, of, with what has written in the book. So compensation structure most favorable to the GP is soft, then catch up, then hard. And for the LP, compensation structure favorable to LP, we can just reverse the order. First hard, then catch up, and then soft, right? So this is something that we need to bear in mind. This is very important. This is the intuition that we've drawn from this discussion, right? um okay, guys, so soft and hurdle with catch up are more or less equal, but not exactly the same, right? Not exactly the same. Right, guys, I'm open to take, we end our discussion here. I'm open to any questions that you might have, guys. Anudeep, Sahil, Neil, Sai, Arun. Anudeep, any questions? Anudeep.
I know. No.
Okay, so see, I was expecting one question from you, Anudeep. So, what question was I expecting? So, you might have asked me, Rahul, where did the management fee go here? Right?
No, yeah, management fee incentive is independent of management fee. So,
So maybe, it's not exactly that. Okay, management fee, incentive fee can be calculated net of management fee also, right?
I see.
The
Okay.
management, your incentive fee can be calculated net of management fee also. That depends upon the agreement between the LP and the
I
GP,
see.
right?
I
So
see. Yeah.
yes, so I was expecting that question. See, what, while giving you examples, I don't want to complicate things, because the more I complicate um, you know, the example would be worse off than the theory, right? So that is why I don't include that. Okay, when we do questions that are in the curriculum, we're going to see a lot of we're going to see a lot of things. We're going to mix up hard hurdles. We're going to mix up hard hurdles with high watermark provisions and all that, and then things are going to get a bit trickier, right? So I'm going to discuss all those things. Apart from that, any doubts, guys? If you feel free to ask anything that you have in mind. So don't hesitate in asking if you have any. The slightest of doubts, I'm here to take that.
Rahul, just once again, please explain the breakdown of the catch up. Like,
So the
what's
catch
the
up
first?
is the catch up is that, the first, the hurdle rate. The hurdle rate goes to the LP, right? So in this particular example, the hurdle rate was 8%, right? So the hurdle rate goes to the LP, right? Then after giving this 8 to the LP, we give the next 2 to the GP. Now, by giving the next 2 to the GP, we ensure that the first 10%, 8 plus 2, 10, the first 10% is split as per the agreed profit sharing ratio of 80-20. 8 goes to the LP, 2 goes to the GP, right? So by giving this 2, we basically ensure that the first 10% is shared as per the agreed profit sharing ratio of 80-20, right? And this, by giving this 2%, we allow the GP to catch up with the LP. By giving this 2%, we allow the GP to catch up with the LP, right? And then
Right.
after distributing this 10, uh, we have to distribute the remaining 4, right? Now this remaining 4 would be split as per the agreed profit sharing ratio of 80-20, right? So 80% of 4 is 3.2 and 20% of 4 is 0.8. Now this 3.2 is going to go to the LP and this 0.8 goes to the GP, right? So this is your catch-up clause, more or less similar to soft hurdle, but not exactly similar. Now again, this is not in the book. If you read the book, if you read the CFA Institute mat, if you read the Squeezer mat, I'm going to give you all these mats today in the group. I'm going to give you all the mats. You go through them in your free time. If you go through the book, they've not written this, but they want you to know this, right? This is implied by what is written. Okay, so right, guys. Apart from that, anyone's having any doubts? No doubts, guys. Anudeep, Sai, Arun,
No.
Neil. So
Mm,
Anudeep,
yeah.
your questions are really nice, right? It forces me to think. I really appreciate your questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I keep asking
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
don't stop, because
Yeah.
you when you grill, when my mind also is working at the optimum when you ask me questions. So don't ever stop that. I encourage students to ask me questions. Right? I encourage that. Right?
Yeah.
So never ever
Yeah.
stop
Thanks for
that.
taking the time. Yeah.
Never ever stop that. Because I mean that would ensure that Uh, we have a very very good grasp of the subject matter, right? Asking such questions ensures that uh, we have very good grasp of the subject matter. Sometimes I may not have answers to these questions. I'll and that will force me to think harder to come up with answers. So really I appreciate it, really.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. Thanks for taking the time. Yeah.
Thanks.
No, 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 no. This is good. I mean, this is like really good. I mean, this helps me prepare better, right? So don't ever stop this. Keep asking such questions ever. Don't think that okay, at times what happens is that one might think that okay, I mean, people hesitate in asking questions. I personally encourage everyone to ask me questions. Okay. Right, guys. So I'll see you on Friday. Have a good
Okay.
night. Bye bye. See ya. Bye. See
Thanks.
you on Friday.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Arun.
Yeah.
See
Thanks.
you. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.